I've spent my whole life listening for the quiet faults. In my line of work, electricity rarely announces its disasters. It sizzles behind drywall, it whispers down copper. By the time it's loud, something's already burning. I got good at catching the soft warnings, warm breakers, a faint buzz that shouldn't be there, the way a light flickers when a compressor kicks on. You learn to trust what most people ignore. Family has its own version of bad wiring. You think you were born into a clean panel, then you pull a faceplate and find a ball of speaker wire twisted into a neutral. If I had to date the first time I smelled smoke, I'd say age 8, in a backyard off Royal Lane in Dallas, when my brother Caleb watched me build something he didn't understand and decided the fastest way to understand it was to break it. He was 10, the golden son with the grass-stained knees and the mouth that got away with everything because he had dimples and a laugh that made my mother soft. I had a drugstore RC kit and a screwdriver set my dad, Frank, bought me because I liked taking things apart and putting them back better. I'd been hunched over that RC car for hours, tongue between my teeth, setting the pinion right, trimming the steering. When I finally clicked the body onto the chassis and gave it a throttle blip in the shade of the pecan tree, it moved smooth and straight enough to make me feel like I'd built a real thing. Caleb said, "Let me see," and before I could answer, he crushed it under his heel. The axle snapped with a clean, mean sound. I looked up at my mother, Denise, who had been watching through the kitchen window with a dish towel in her hands. She opened the back door and told me to stop being dramatic. "Don't make such a fuss, Jake," she said. "Caleb is spirited. Dad was at work. It was summer, and the afternoon bent around us like a heat haze." Caleb handed me the broken wheel like a prize. That's the oldest memory I have of the roles we auditioned for and never stopped playing. I was the kid who learned to fix the damage without asking anyone to admit they caused it. Caleb was the kid who knocked something over and then made a joke about gravity. He grew up into the version of himself that earned a seat at every table in our mother's house without having to set it. Somehow, his missed homework was the teacher's fault. Somehow, his fender bender was the city's fault for painting the lines wrong. My mother specialized in excuses the way some moms specialize in casseroles. Frank and I specialized in the aftermath. I left for UT Austin and majored in electrical engineering because it made sense to me. Circuits obey laws, currents have reasons. I liked the smell of solder and the clean certainty of a multimeter's beep. 4 years later, I came home to Dallas because TI dangled a job I wanted, and because, if I'm honest, I wanted to be close enough to make sure my father's shoulders didn't carry everything alone. I met Lauren in the lobby of a mid-rise off Mockingbird while I was waiting for a leasing agent to tell me my new apartment keys were ready. She was behind the front desk with a headset on and a stack of packages arranged by apartment number like a Tetris game. Her nails were short and clean, her hair was pulled into one of those low buns that makes a person look like they know where the nearest Band-Aid is at all times. She looked up at me, smiled a smile that had no edges, and asked, "You, Jake?" I nodded. "Welcome to your chaos," she said, and slid the envelope across the counter. "Elevator on the left is louder, but faster." "I appreciate honesty in my machinery," I said. She laughed. It was a sound that made a room feel like it remembered you. We started with coffee because that's how people begin in buildings like that. We didn't have to lie to find common ground. I liked that she had a day planner with tabs and that she used the phrase, "we're closed," like a priest saying a blessing. She liked that I knew how to fix her microwave when it developed a high-pitched whine at odd hours and that I carried a pocket screwdriver like other men carry a knife. We went to Keller's for burgers in the bed of my friend's truck and had that first kiss that feels like a circuit closing. We didn't mean to get married fast. We meant to be responsible and slow, and then good intentions met biology, and November met a positive test, and we were standing in front of a county clerk's office with rings that didn't cost what commercials say they should, but fit our fingers just fine. We were 29 and 27. We told ourselves the speed was romantic. We told everyone else it was grown-up. At that time, I believed both. Our son, Dylan, arrived on a gray morning that tasted like hospital coffee. He was smaller than the word son had felt in my mouth, and louder. Lauren's face went soft and unfathomable in a way I still can't describe without making it sound like a hymn. I cried into my sleeve and pretended it was because a nurse had sneezed near the ventilated ceiling, but the truth is, I'd never seen something that I helped make that didn't require a warranty. We had a year that felt like a movie montage, Lauren swaying in the kitchen with Dylan on her shoulder to a song that made him quiet. me falling asleep in a chair with a burp cloth on my chest, Frank teaching me how to hold a baby the way you hold a trout you intend to release, Denise posting Facebook albums with captions that made it sound like Caleb had invented the concept of uncle. The first crack didn't look like a crack. It looked like a joke Lauren told at a barbecue. Dylan was 6 months old. We were at my parents' house in Lake Highlands. The Cowboys were losing on a TV that was too loud. The yard smelled like lighter fluid and grass. Caleb arrived late in a shirt that made my mother say, "Handsome," in a tone you reserve for boys you still dress with your eyes. He scooped Dylan from my father's arms and walked him around the room like he was giving a tour of a place he owned. Lauren laughed on cue. Later, when we were all shifting plates from the table to the sink and the game had devolved into reminders that hope kills, Caleb leaned against the fridge and said, "If you ever get tired of this nerd spreadsheets, Lauren, you know I can introduce you to fun." He said it like a joke. My mother snapped him with a dish rag in a way she thought was maternal. Lauren put a hand on his forearm in the easy, thoughtless way people do when they're used to being liked and said, "You couldn't handle me, Caleb." He grinned. I grinned too, because that's what we do in families. We grin through the part where we should open the panel and check the wires. The first real infidelity wasn't Caleb. It was nobody and then somebody. Lauren called it a mistake, one of those elastic words that covers a lot of specific ground. Dylan was a year old, and Luther Vandross was playing on a Bluetooth speaker while I fixed a lamp for my neighbor. Lauren told me she'd kissed a coworker at a holiday party and then told me she'd ended it. I believed her because I wanted to. We went to 3 counseling sessions that taught us to say, "I feel," in a way that didn't sound like a police report, and then we stopped going because Dylan got a fever and work ran long and life presented more urgent triage. I forgave her, which is to say, I set the breaker back to on and didn't label the circuit. Time did that time thing. We moved into a brick rental in Lake Highlands with a patch of grass that Dylan could fall on and an old pecan tree that felt like a callback. I did TI by day and side work for a guy who wired restaurants by night when he needed an extra brain. Lauren became the office manager at a medical practice in Uptown where the doctors liked to pretend they were overworked saints and the patients liked to pretend they were fine. Caleb moved into a glassy condo in Uptown as if proximity to windows could translate to transparency. He sold cars the way a magician sells misdirection. My mother decorated his place with throw pillows that cost what brake pads cost. She called him my heart in front of me and then made a show of calling me my rock, so the room felt even. My father looked at me sometimes with an apology he didn't know how to deliver. The second set of alarms started with little things that I would have dismissed if I hadn't spent my life learning that little things are all you get before the fire. Lauren began staying late on Thursdays because of inventory. She started wearing a perfume that smelled like grapefruit and something sweet I couldn't name. I didn't buy it and I didn't see it on the dresser. She switched her Ubers from my account to her own for work reimbursement, which made sense until it didn't. A wrong turn on a Saturday put us near Caleb's building, and the way she sat lower in the seat felt like a reflex, not a draft. At Dylan's 2-year checkup, the pediatrician's nurse stapled an information sheet into the booklet with his height and weight and shots and, in the corner, a blood type. "O negative," she wrote, in that nurse handwriting that looks efficient enough to sterilize a room. We didn't talk about it then. It wasn't a conversation to have while Dylan tried to pull the otoscope off the counter. A week later, we were in line at a blood drive at work. TI does them quarterly, and a tech looked at my card and said, "AB positive, lucky duck, universal recipient." It was a throwaway line, a script they say 100 times a day. It hit me like a bad grounding. Later, at home, I went hunting for Lauren's old Red Cross donor card because she used to be diligent about that stuff before our lives turned into a series of logistics. I found it in a junk drawer in a phone wallet thing she didn't use anymore. A positive. AB positive and A positive cannot produce O negative. I know that, like, I know Ohm's law. You don't need to be a geneticist. It's one of those middle school Punnett square rules drunk uncles like to misremember at Thanksgiving. You need 2 O's to make an O. AB has no O to give. A can be AO, but AB cannot carry O, but AB cannot carry O. It's right there in the letters. There are rare exceptions. Bombay phenotype, they call it, but rare is the thing you say when you want to pretend a problem is a trivia question. My brain did what it always does, split into 2 neat halves. One half said, "You're overreacting." The nurse might have written O when she meant A, she was in a hurry. The other half ran load calculations for a worst-case scenario and came up with 98% probability of a very ugly truth. I sat with it for a week and lived two lives. In one, I was the man who watched his son run an orange truck across the rug and didn't care whether letters matched. In the other, I was the man who held a faulty panel open with a flashlight in his mouth because if you shut it, the house burns while you sleep. When you grow up with a brother like Caleb and a mother like Denise, you learn that proof matters more than pain. My mother wasn't going to believe anything that didn't arrive with a notarized seal and a choir of angels singing corroboration. Caleb wasn't going to admit anything if he could grin his way into a lesser sentence. Lauren, I didn't know. The person who had swayed to music in our kitchen with Dylan on her shoulder felt as far away as the woman who practiced her apology with phrases she picked up in a therapist's waiting room. I needed evidence that didn't require anyone to meet me halfway. It started simple. I logged into the pediatrician's portal and downloaded Dylan's records. Oh, negative, on 3 separate visits. I took pictures of the pages because hard copies are what you produce when people call you dramatic. Then I checked my blood donor app again because denial is a powerful chemical. AB positive, there in bold. Then came Lauren's card, a positive. I sat on the floor with those 3 facts and a memory of 8th grade biology and hated the man I was in that moment for calculating his child. I told myself it still could be a strange corner case and that the kinder thing to do was to speak to Lauren softly and alone. Then the condo receipts arrived in my world like a second breaker tripping the same day. Lauren asked for a new login to the family photo account because she'd forgotten her password. I reset it and our shared iCloud offered me a new album called Favorites that included a photo of a Dallas skyline from a high angle with a strip of glass railing in the foreground. It was the view from Caleb's building. The geotag said so in a tiny gray font no one reads unless they spend their life reading tiny fonts. The timestamp matched a Thursday inventory night. Lauren's hand was in the frame, a sliver of her. She had painted her nails a color she called Victory Red. I had seen that red come and go. On weekends, she said she needed to feel like herself. I didn't blow up then. I wish I could tell you I marched into our bedroom with that image in my hand and the stability of truth under my feet. I didn't. I poured a glass of water and watched it catch the kitchen light like a halo and thought about what men become when they discover they are a punchline. I checked our old shared Uber history out of habit more than hope. Her new account hid its trips from me, but my email still had monthly receipts from the old one, the ones from before she switched. 2 of them ended within a block of Caleb's building at 11:43 p.m. on nights she said she had to close out inventory at the practice. That was enough to do what my father would call a plan and my mother would call a performance. Thanksgiving is my mother's Super Bowl. Denise builds the day like a float candied yams, green bean casserole with the kind of onions that taste like a dare, a pecan pie from a bakery she references with reverence, as if the pastry chef is auditioning for heaven. The Cowboys game blares. The table is set with a turkey that looks like a magazine cover, except the gravy boat always has a nick, because nothing escapes real life. It was mid-October when I bought a stack of 23andMe and Ancestry kits, 6 of them, 2 brands, because redundancy matters on a day when Target had a sale that made the rational part of me smug. I told Lauren it would be a fun family thing, a heritage challenge. We could do together, print the little maps, find out our ancestors were exactly as complicated as we pretend we are. She laughed and said, "You're such a dad," and kissed my jaw like a concession speech that felt like victory. I did not tell her that I had already taken Dylan's cheek swab and my own to a private lab the week before for a paternity test to rule out the 1 in a million ABO anomaly, a sentence I practiced in silence because saying it out loud made me into a man I didn't recognize. I had collected Dylan's sample the way you collect a secret, carefully, with a cartoon on in the background and a promise to myself that the result would be contained like a hazardous material. The lab had sent me a result in a PDF that tasted like metal, probability of paternity DO.0%. I printed it and slid it into a folder with a copy of my blood donor card, a copy of Lauren's card, the pediatrician record, and screenshots of the iCloud geotag. I added 2 Uber emails for good measure. I labeled the folder evidence in capital letters because sometimes being on the nose is all you have left. If you're going to blow up your life, you might as well pick a stage. I picked my mother's dining room because Denise would never forgive me for excluding her, because Caleb would not show his true face in anyone else's house, because my father would keep a lid on the pot with the quiet weight of his hands until the exact second it was time to lift it. The week of Thanksgiving, Lauren got sweeter, a kind of nostalgic sweet that felt like a season finale. She asked if I remembered our first burger at Keller's, the way I'd passed her a napkin, and she'd said gentleman with a smirk. She bought a sweater for Dylan that had tiny turkeys on it that would look ridiculous in every photo and therefore be perfect. She stood in our doorway in a dress that made her look like a version of herself I missed so much it physically hurt, and asked, "Are we okay?" And I said, "We will be," and wanted to throw up at my choice of tense. Thanksgiving morning smelled like coffee and a clean driveway. I caught Dylan under the arms and flipped him onto the bed and told him we were going to Granny and Pop's for pie, which is what you call Thanksgiving if you're 3. Lauren curled her hair in the bathroom and hummed something I couldn't place. In the car, we listened to a podcast about old country songs because talking felt like a thing I couldn't do without cracking. Denise had arranged the table the way she always does. Turkey on a platter with parsley, cloth napkins, place cards, water glasses that sweat even in November because her thermostat is set to tropics. Frank met us at the door with a one-armed hug he saves for when his chest is full enough that he needs the other arm to steady himself. Caleb arrived 5 minutes late and kissed our mother's cheek like blessing and clapped my shoulder like we were war buddies. He picked Dylan up and spun him, and Lauren said, "Careful," in a voice that had a threat in it I didn't know how to follow. "Okay, folks," I said after the first pass at the turkey, when the room had settled into that post-carbohydrate lull, when the game in the background had turned from hope to tolerated noise. "I brought a family activity." Denise clapped, delighted at the idea of a holiday with a game. Frank raised an eyebrow at a package like he always does. "Show me what's inside before you explain it." Caleb flexed a grin. Lauren watched my hands. I set a neat stack of kits on the table and said, "I thought it would be fun to do the ancestry thing together. You know, see where we all come from, argue about percentages, find out we're 2% this or 3% that. Heritage challenge, Monroes versus the rest of the Monroes." Caleb laughed. Denise said, "Oh, Jacob," in that pleased, scolding way she reserves for when I've done something domestic enough to make me look like a magazine husband. Lauren smiled a careful smile that looked like something she had ironed. Frank said, "You're always doing projects, which in his mouth is the closest thing to a medal." We distributed tubes and instruction sheets. Denise asked without reading, "Do I eat first or spit first?" Caleb said something about, "That's what she said," and Denise swatted him with a napkin because we live in a sitcom, she directs. Dylan wanted to spit like everyone else but ended up drooling onto a spoon and laughing until he hiccuped. It was domestic and silly and exactly the wallpaper I needed if I was going to tear the wall down. When everyone had their little tube capped and sealed in a bag-like evidence produced from nowhere, I said, lightly, "And because I'm me, I made us a slideshow." I stood, carried my laptop to the end of the table where the wall outlet lives, plugged in the HDMI I'd run last night under the rug like a man who can't help himself, and the TV switched from men in tight pants to a background screen that said Monroe Family Tree in a font I should be embarrassed to have chosen. Denise clapped again. Caleb said, "We doing a genealogy episode now?" He has always treated other people's work like entertainment he's owed. "Just a little warm-up," I said. "Fun stuff. Traits. Did you know 23andMe can't tell if you're a morning person if you lie to yourself, but it can tell if you're likely to hate cilantro?" "Cilantro tastes like a garden hose," Denise said, and everyone laughed. "If you're going to detonate, you might as well let people laugh first." Slide 1, a map with blobs. Slide 2, a dumb trait about earlobes. Slide 3, a page titled Blood TYPs with a couple of squares and some letters and a cartoon explanation like the kind you find in kids' science books. I didn't make it accusatory. I made it educational. The point isn't to corner. The point is to make denial sound ridiculous. "Okay," I said, pointing with the remote like a guy who wears khakis on purpose. "Basic genetics refresher. Blood types. Denise, you've always been A, right? You still wear that Red Cross sticker like a badge of honor." "I am a patriot," she said, hand to chest, and everyone laughed again. "I'm AB positive," I said, popping my own donor card up on the screen with a scan. Never underestimate the persuasive power of a QR code image. Lauren's card from her Red Cross app says, "A positive," I clicked. The screen showed her scanned card because I had it. I had it because we share a house and a junk drawer. Lauren's eyes flashed to mine, confusion sliding toward embarrassment. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to yet. And Dylan, I said, keeping my tone in the neighborhood of, isn't this interesting, has O negative in his pediatrician records. I clicked to a neatly cropped image from the portal with Dylan's name blocked for privacy because even in rage, you can be a person. Which is cool because it makes him a universal donor one day if he wants to be. But the thing is, O requires two O genes. O is recessive. If your dad is AB, he has no O to give. Denise frowned like she does at math. Caleb smirked like he does at anything that doesn't touch him. Frank's jaw got a fraction tighter. Lauren's hand went to Dylan's head, almost absent. There are rare exceptions, I said, before anyone could accuse me of being the guy with the internet degree. The Bombay phenotype, weird interactions with antigens, those exist. So I did a thing to make sure we weren't the trivia question. I clicked. The next slide was a simple sentence I had typed in a neutral font because I didn't want style to get in the way of content. Paternity testing indicates a 0% probability that Jake Monroe is the biological father of Dylan Monroe. Under it, the lab letterhead. Under that, the kind of string of numbers that makes official people happy. The room didn't make a sound. It made a lack of sound. The Cowboys game hissed from the kitchen where the TV had been left on low. Somewhere a car alarm tripped and shut itself off. Denise said, "What are you doing?" Not as a question, but as a doctrine. Her face had the gray look of someone who sees the ocean is, in fact, wet. Frank inhaled through his nose and didn't exhale. Caleb made a single staccato laugh and then swallowed it like it had hurt his tongue. Dylan said, "Pie now? Because he's 3 and the universe has rules." Lauren closed her eyes, only for a second, long enough that when she opened them, they were someone else's eyes trying to figure out which script the director had just handed her. She kept her palm on Dylan's hair like she was grounding herself. "Jake," she said, and my name in her mouth felt like a note I hadn't tuned in years. "Can we talk privately, please?" "We will," I said evenly. Because I had practiced, I flattened, emptied this voice. I looked at my father, who had not moved because movement is a confession. I looked at my mother, whose face had gone through 4 expressions and settled on offended patriot. I looked at Caleb, and the mask he wore flickered like a fluorescent bulb in an old office. He looked at Lauren, not at me. "Why would you do this here?" Denise said, voice low and dangerous in the way of mothers who think you have embarrassed them at their own table. "Because the last time I brought something up quietly, I got told to stop being dramatic," I said, and my voice softened on the word dramatic in a way that made my father finally exhale. "Because I grew up in a house where the person who broke the thing got a joke and the person who fixed it got a chore. Because if I didn't do it here, you'd say I poisoned the well. So here's the well, Denise. It's clear." Caleb stood up like he was suddenly called away by something only he could hear. "I'm not sticking around for this," he said, which is a line people use when they suspect the camera is about to find them. Denise grabbed his wrist by instinct. He shook her off gently, but in a way that made me think of the RC car under his heel. Frank's palm hit the table once. Not loud. Final. The sound of a judge setting a gavel down after the verdict, not during. Caleb sat back down without meaning to. Lauren's voice came out calm and ruined. "Jake," she said, "please, stop. Dylan can hear you." I looked at my son, who had used the quiet to climb onto Frank's knee because he likes the topography of his grandfather. Frank put a hand on Dylan's stomach like he always does, like he's making sure the boy keeps breathing. "I'm not saying anything Dylan will remember," I said, and hated how certain I was. Lauren's face did something fragile. She looked at me, then at Caleb, then at Frank, then at the screen, as if one of those angles would give her a version of this room she could live in. She said, too softly for Denise but loud enough for me, "I'm sorry," and the words landed on the table like pieces of a plate that had been falling for months. Denise said, "Sorry? Sorry? For what, Lauren? That you had to put up with Jacobs?" "Mom," I said, and the word had an iron core I didn't know I could forge. "This is not the speech you think you're about to give." I clicked the remote again. The screen changed to a photo, the skyline from Caleb's balcony, Lauren's nails in the corner, the timestamp. I clicked. 2 Uber receipts stacked like railroad ties, drop-off points highlighted near Caleb's building on nights that were not inventory nights. I clicked. A map with a red dot. "Stop," Lauren said, with a kind of rawness that made Denise close her mouth like she'd caught a bee. Caleb tried on his easiest grin and found it didn't fit. "Bro," he said, "you're being insane. Lauren's like a sister to me." It was such a stupid sentence, it almost made me laugh. If she's a sister to you, I said, we've got bigger problems than blood types. Then the Cowboys scored, and the cheer from the kitchen TV rolled into the dining room a beat late, like a party we hadn't been invited to. For a second, the whole scene turned absurd. Dylan asking for pie, football men celebrating, my mother clenching her napkin like she could strangle a linen square into defending her, my father watching the people he loves like he was looking at a schematic that finally revealed where the short had been all along. I put the remote down. We can do this 3 ways, I said, and the part of me that drafts options for clients surfaced like muscle memory. 1, we deny obvious things and insult all of our intelligence. 2, we speak the truths we've been avoiding and try to be humans. 3, we call lawyers and turn this into paperwork. But I'm telling you now, I'm not raising my voice and I'm not moving off what I know. Lauren swallowed in a way that made the room tilt. She looked at Frank and said, I'm sorry, again, this time in a register people use when they know they're asking the wrong person for forgiveness. Frank nodded once, like a man standing under a power line in a storm who knows better than to reach for the thing that will kill him. Denise turned to Caleb because that is where she turns in all emergencies, and in that second, I saw the smallest fracture in the person she had been since I was born. She looked at her favorite and didn't find what she always found there, an immediate way to make this not his fault. Her mouth moved and produced nothing. It was almost kindness. Caleb's hand went to his pocket. I don't know if he meant to grab his keys or his phone or a lifeline. He didn't get to find out. Frank's voice, which lives most days in a narrow band between pass me the salt and hand me the wrench, came out with a bass I'd never heard. Caleb, he said, and the sound of his son's name in his mouth made my brother sit back like someone had pulled a plug at the base of his skull. You will not move, you will not lie, and you will not smirk in your mother's face while your brother explains why his life is on fire at our table. Lauren's shoulders folded like a tent in wind. She said quietly, it wasn't supposed to be like this, which is the truest thing any of us had said all day. I looked at the boy on my father's knee, at the small, perfect curve of his ear, at the way his hair turned up at the back no matter how you smoothed it. Some part of me had been braced for the moment I would look at Dylan and see a stranger. It didn't come. The hurt wasn't that he wasn't mine. The hurt was that I had to say it out loud in a room that had never kept me safe. My mouth opened to keep speaking, to lay out waypoints so none of us could pretend we got lost by accident. Instead, I breathed, and the room, my mother's room, my father's room, the room where my brother had learned he could be adored without deserving it, tilted toward a future I had promised myself I would not make any easier by being polite. Frank broke the silence for us, the way he always had when the room drifted toward a storm nobody wanted to name. He stood slow, like wait equals deliberation, then knelt and lifted Dylan from his lap as if he were taking a hot pan off a burner. He handed him to me. The transfer was simple and merciful, like he was telling me with his hands that what was real did not need paperwork. Pie, Dylan said again, because that was the only plot he had. In a minute, buddy, I said, and I pressed my face into his hair for 1 second longer than a minute, then handed him to Denise, who held him like a lifeline and a grenade. Lauren stared at the lab letterhead, and then at me, and then at Caleb, as if she could pick one of us and make the world recommence on a different axis. The skin around her eyes had that fresh, stunned look of someone stepping into bright light. I watched her mouth working, not to form words, but to sort through the ones she'd rehearsed and realize none of them were safe anymore. I didn't want to hurt you, she said, the oldest, smallest truth in the book, and it sat on the table with the turkey and the green beans and the 2 receipts like one more dish nobody had an appetite for. Caleb cleared his throat the way you do when you're about to launch a bit, then saw Frank watching him and swallowed the bit whole. My father didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He's the kind of man who can make a room reconsider itself with a look. How long? He asked. Not to me. Lauren braced both hands on the edge of the table and pinched her wedding band with her thumb like she might twist it off by friction alone. She found the far wall, then the ceiling, then me. Before the wedding, she said, and the words landed so softly I almost had to lean toward them like a man listening for a bad transformer. You were pregnant when we married, I said. I knew that sentence in my bones. I just hadn't ever said it out loud in a room with our mother's good china. I didn't know whose, she said, and there was something naked and unsellable in her face that I hadn't made room for in my anger. It was stupid and mean, and I told myself it was a one-time thing, and then I told myself that the timing didn't matter because love matters, and we were Her voice thinned, then snapped. I tried to choose us. My mother made a sound like a tea kettle left on the stove too long. Denise's grief has always come out as blame first. You brought this into my house, she said to Lauren, to me, to the heir, into my table, the child. The... Stop, Frank said to her, and the tea kettle went quiet. Caleb let a smile flash and die, a reflex that had always saved him, and then he realized there was nowhere to aim it. His dimples. God, those dimples appeared without permission. He looked like we were 10 and he'd broken the RC axle again and was waiting for someone to say, boys will be boys. Look, he started, and Frank's hand lifted a fraction, not a threat, just a semaphore. Caleb shut his mouth. I didn't ask the question that had been chewing its way through my chest for days. I didn't ask, why him? I knew why him. Because he was there. Because men like Caleb moved through rooms like they were built to be climbed. Because I had been working late on the night Lauren texted him that she didn't think she could breathe inside the life she had, and Caleb didn't think about whether he wanted to be the man who opened a window or the man who invited her to lean out of it. Because we were all playing the roles we'd auditioned for before we were born. Okay, I said, to the room, to the paper on the screen, to my father's knuckles, to the boy in my mother's lap who was driving his spoon over the tablecloth like a car. Okay, here's what happens next. Denise bristled, and I felt the old ache of a boy who gets called bossy when he brings a plan to a fire. Frank's eyes warmed in the way they do when you're doing the hard thing right. I am filing for divorce, I said to Lauren. I felt my mouth shape the word like a rivet gun, fast, final, functional. We'll do it without theatrics. We'll do it with counsel. We'll do it with respect for Dylan because he didn't ask for a single second of this. But we will do it. Lauren nodded, once, as if she'd already built a small theater in her head where we had the same conversation with better lighting. Yes, she said, I know. You will both take a court-ordered paternity test with chain of custody, I said, because the part of me that knows how to wire a room also knows you don't let a crucial connection float. We will put beyond dispute what is already clear. Caleb said, that won't be necessary, and the corner of his mouth tried to curl up again on instinct. Frank's chair scraped the floor a half-inch. Caleb's mouth straightened. Fine, he said, whatever. You will also, I said to Caleb, and I let my eyes do what my mouth didn't have to. Stop calling me bro. He exhaled through his nose, small, offended. It was almost funny, in the way that gallows humor can be a compass. I turned to Frank, then to Denise. Because you don't skip your mother when you're changing the architecture of the house you were raised in. I am not going to participate in any fiction where this was an accident that happened to us while we were sleeping, I said. I love you. I love our family, but I will not stand in a kitchen and listen to anyone say mistakes like it's a bandage. Denise opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. She looked smaller, like someone had let air out of the woman who could organize a holiday while scorning entropy. For the first time in years, she looked at me without the filter she used to translate me into the child she'd chosen to have. I'm sorry, she said, and the sentence stunned me more than the lab result had. I should have seen. Frank dropped a hand on my shoulder. It was heavy and perfect. We see now, he said. We act now. Caleb stood again. No one stopped him this time. He tossed his napkin on the table like a man who has always believed linens are there to absorb his exits. I'm not doing this circus, he said. You're humiliating yourself. You're humiliating Mom. You did that, Frank said, quiet and exactly enough. Caleb made it to the doorway and turned, a reflexive last shot firing. You think Dad's going to pick you over me? He asked me, as if the answer had never occurred to him as a variable in the equation. Please. Frank leaned on the table with both hands. It was not an old man's lean. It was a craftsman's lean when he invites you to look level with him at the thing you've made. Tomorrow, he said, I am calling the lawyer. The will changes. The business interests change. You will not inherit my sins of indulgence. Caleb laughed, high and hard, an ugly sound I'd never heard out of him before. Oh, look, he said to the ceiling. The old man discovered boundaries at 70. It's never too late to learn, Frank said. And then, because Frank is Frank, and I am sorry it took seeing who your brother is to see who I let you become. The room didn't break. It rearranged itself. Caleb left without another word. Denise started crying, the kind of quiet cry that doesn't want witnesses. Lauren asked if she could take Dylan into the den and put on a cartoon, and I said yes, because love is weird like that. It can coexist with a courtroom. I shut the slideshow down. The TV, freed from duty, spit out 3 men talking about a play none of us had watched. The turkey cooled and the gravy took on that filmed look of a thing left behind. Frank handed me a bourbon I hadn't seen him pour. We stood under the doorway, two men whose hands had done a lot of fixing in a world that preferred breaking. "I'm sorry," he said, and I nodded because there are apologies that don't have a second half and still count. The rest of that day is a smear of logistics and human impulses that don't make good TV. Denise cut pie because she didn't know where else to put her hands. Lauren put Dylan down for a nap on the couch and covered him with a cowboy's blanket and tucked the edge under his leg the way she always did. Caleb didn't come back. Frank looked at me like he wanted to find a way to make this cost me less and knew there wasn't one. We went home early. I carried the kits back to the car and felt like a man hauling fireworks that had already gone off. The week after Thanksgiving was paperwork. A consultation with a lawyer who wore a suit that fit and a face that didn't react when I laid out the ABO mismatch and the lab result like exhibits in a small, sad trial. Texas is Texas. Community property is community. Fault can matter. Spousal maintenance is a short word for a long fight. My lawyer said we could negotiate hard. He said judges are humans, not algorithms. He said the paternity issue would intersect with child support like two interstates in a city that had not planned for growth. I signed an affidavit to challenge the presumption of paternity. It felt as if I were scratching my name into a tree I used to sit under. Lauren's lawyer served discovery requests that were mostly polite and occasionally mercenary. Caleb ignored service twice, then accepted it with a sigh so loud you could hear it on paper. Chain of custody day looked like every TV show you've ever seen where a swab goes into a vial and a technician looks like an extra in a movie. The lab was clean and impersonal, a space built to make grief feel like data. Lauren went first. She stared at the wall while the tech swabbed her cheek. Caleb joked with the woman about whether he'd ever be famous enough to have his DNA on file already. The woman did not laugh. I stood with my hands in my pockets and counted ceiling tiles and thought about how Dylan had started saying truck with an extra consonant in the middle. The results came back, the way gravity comes back. Probability of paternity for Caleb Monroe, 99.99%. The number might as well have been written with a thunderclap. Lauren called me herself. "You'll get the email," she said, voice thin. "I wanted you to hear it first, even though you already knew." "Thank you," I said. It felt like a ridiculous sentence and also like the only human thing we had to trade left. When I told Frank, he closed his eyes and nodded once, like a man acknowledging a pain that at least has the decency to arrive on schedule. Denise put a hand over her mouth, even though she had been told this result by every inch of evidence and by the part of her that had started, against her will, to grow a new lens. "My baby," she said, and I didn't ask which one she meant. Finality did not feel like relief. It felt like a breaker clicking off to save the house and plunging the room into dark. I moved out of the brick rental into a two-bedroom in Lakewood that had too much echo at night and a view of a parking lot. I put Dylan's drawings on my fridge even though I wasn't sure what name I was supposed to hold under my tongue when I did it. Lauren and I worked out a schedule for me to see him while the lawyers organized the reality. It wasn't a legal right, it was two people choosing not to be the worst versions of themselves. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie in bed and feel the enormity of the thing I wasn't, and my brain would start rummaging through the past for details that would let me hate more cleanly. It doesn't work like that. You don't get to curate your rage. It shows up with non-refundable tickets, and you either make a bed for it or you tell it there's a hotel down the road and you're not paying the minibar charges when it comes back hungover. Frank started stopping by my new place in the evenings with a bag of screws or a tool I didn't need. We'd sit on my tiny balcony and drink beer and not talk about anything we didn't have to. One night, he handed me a creased envelope. Inside was a copy of a letter to his lawyer. The will, rewritten. The specifics weren't poetry, business holdings consolidated, accounts retitled, trusts rearranged. The sentence that stood out in the middle like a little gallows said that any bequest to his younger son would be $1. "You don't have to do that," I said, because even now, the part of me that manages other people's comfort tried to get a word in. "I have to do something," he said. "I spent a lot of years confusing love with rescue. I'm allowed a correction." "You don't owe me money." He looked at me with a tired patience I had always wanted to deserve. "It's not payment," he said. "It's instruction. It's me telling the men in this family what comes next." Denise came by 2 days later with a pie no one asked for and a look on her face like a woman trying to learn a new language at 70. She sat at my small table and told me she had started seeing a counselor at church. She told me she had been wrong to make a golden boy out of Caleb and a pack mule out of me. She did not ask me to forgive her. She did not tell me time would fix it. She said, "I'm sorry," and let the sentence hang in the room like a picture that doesn't require a caption. Lauren's apology came in pieces, over a dozen logistical exchanges about Dylan's daycare and winter boots and whether he was ready for a real bed. One night when I dropped Dylan off at her new place, an apartment off Lemon, smaller than ours had been, neat as a catalog, she stepped out onto the breezeway with me and said, "I was lonely, and I made myself the main character in a movie that didn't have a second act. I don't want that to be who I am." Her eyes were clear in a way that made my own sting. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "But I want you to know I'm trying to be a woman Dylan won't have to forgive." "You can be that," I said, and it wasn't absolution. It was a boundary with a door in it. Caleb didn't call. He texted me twice with half thoughts that looked like bait, and I let them sink without a tug. He tried Frank, and Frank did him the courtesy of silence. Denise visited him once and left early, came to my place afterward, and sat on my couch and stared at the floor. "He said I ruined him," she said. "I told him I did him no favors. He said those were the same thing." She looked up at me, and in her eyes I saw a woman who had walked into a mirror and met a person she didn't know and decided not to look away. "I told him the will," she added, and even though she didn't say the words out loud, I knew what they tasted like to her tongue. She cried, the quiet kind again, then wiped her face like a woman washing up after a long day in a kitchen that used to be busier. "I'll keep going to the counselor," she said. "You can't say I only did it once." The divorce terms came together the way snow accumulates in Dallas, oddly, with city services outmatched, and then suddenly, there it is. Lauren kept the car she drove. I kept my truck. We split the furniture along predictable fault lines. No spousal maintenance. The mediator's eyebrows lifted when he read the clause I insisted on, the one that said neither party would disparage the other to the child. You learn things about yourself in rooms like that. You learn you can be petty and principled in the same breath, and the trick is remembering which breath you're using when. Dylan's status moved from something the law calls presumption to something the law calls recognition. Caleb signed papers that repeated his name until the ink looked like a trick of the eye. Child support took an act of court and an act of will that, to his credit, he performed without a tantrum. Maybe shame is a slow teacher. Maybe money is a fast one. Lauren stopped using the phrase, "my son," in sentences that excluded me, and I stopped using the phrase, "the boy," like a man in a movie who thinks stoicism is a personality trait. There were clean moments. The day I took my wedding ring off in the parking lot behind the courthouse and realized my finger would need a while to forget its shape. The first Saturday, I didn't wake up to Dylan's cartoon footsteps and instead went for a run around White Rock Lake and let my legs burn because it was the simplest pain I could control. The morning Frank texted me a photo of a legal document with nothing but a thumbs up emoji, a tiny rebellion against a lifetime of stoic punctuation. The afternoon I sat across from a therapist named Max who wore socks with tiny lightning bolts on them and told me that hypervigilance is just a man's nervous system trying to parent him. And then there were messy days. The afternoon Dylan asked me why my house and mommy's house were different, and I said, because grown-ups sometimes need different kitchens to make the same dinner, and then went home and cried on my floor for an hour. The night my mother slipped and said, "When are you bringing the baby by?" in a voice that wanted to pretend the world wasn't as it was, and I had to say gently, "He's not my baby, Mom," and watch the sentence cut her in a place I couldn't bandage. The morning I saw Caleb's car outside my parents' house and drove past without stopping because I wasn't ready to be in a room where my father would need both hands to hold his sons away from each other's throats. Spring came early that year. In Dallas, that means a week of complicit weather before the air gets thick again and tells you it has plans. I started taking Dylan to the park on my days, and we'd sit on the swings, and he'd narrate trucks like a sportscaster. He calls me Jake sometimes. Kids do, when adults do. At first, it sliced me. Then it became its own name, the name of the man who shows up and pushes the swing and knows the difference between a front loader and a skid steer and who will always, always show up. One Sunday in April, Frank invited me to lunch, which is not a thing he does without a reason. We went to a diner near the auto parts store because my father is suspicious of places where the water comes in bottles. He slid a folded page across the table. Another will revision, this time with a line I hadn't expected, a trust in Dylan's name, not through Caleb, but through Lauren, administered by a third party, funds earmarked for education, for braces, for the 1,000 small mercies that make a kid's life feel like someone thought ahead. I cleared it with counsel, he said. You can do this without stepping on legal landmines. It's not about rewarding bad behavior. It's about making sure the child who didn't ask for any of this is not collateral. You don't have to, I said uselessly. I do, he said, because I love you and because I'm trying to love my grandson without making the mistake of pretending love is math. I didn't have words for the way that sentence landed in me. I reached across the table and squeezed my father's forearm, the way you hold a wire you've tested for live and decided to believe. I wish I could wrap this in a bow and tell you that everyone learned their lesson and we got a third act montage. The truth is less symmetrical and more human. Caleb tried to come back around Memorial Day. He sent 3 texts in a row and then showed up at my door with a 6-pack and a practiced pout. He told me that Dad was overreacting. He told me that the whole town knew now and he was tired of being the bad guy for being a man. He told me he missed us, as if there had been an us that wasn't me picking up a wrench every time he turned a screw the wrong way. I stood in the doorway and listened to him the way you listen to a transformer. Attentive, alert for danger, not fooled by the appearance of regular function. "You're my brother," I said when he ran out of air. "That doesn't entitle you to access." He sneered, a fast, ugly flash. "You think Dad's money makes you righteous?" "Dad's money doesn't make me anything," I said, "but your actions made me done." He rolled his eyes, then caught sight of his reflection in my front window and rearranged his face into something charming. I didn't move. He cracked the 6-pack on his thigh, handed me one like a right. I didn't take it. "Get sober," I said. "Get honest, then we can talk." He snorted. "You always did think you were better." "I think I'm done," I repeated and closed the door. I locked it, not because I was afraid, but because a boundary is a door that stays a door. 2 nights later, I found a note under my doormat. "Jake," it said, his handwriting the same as it had been in 10th grade when he'd copied my physics homework. I screwed up. "I'm trying. Can we talk?" The period after talk was a country we'd never visited together. I texted him a number for a therapist and a list of Al-Anon meetings for the family of addicts, even though no one had yet said that word out loud. He didn't reply. I didn't chase. Love that chases turns into something else before it gets where it's going. Summer then. The heat pressed Dallas flat. Dylan turned 3.5 and discovered the magic trick where you run through a sprinkler and become a scream with legs. Lauren and I figured out how to stand next to each other at drop-off without tearing at seams that had been mended too recently. We talked about daycare forms and shoes that pinch. We did not talk about forgiveness like it was a currency. We paid in schedules and snacks and the choice, over and over, not to weaponize what we knew about each other. In August, Frank had a small scare chest pain that turned out to be indigestion and a rude nurse, and he took it as a memo from the universe. He retired from the parts of the business he'd hung on to for later and started fishing more. He invited me. Sometimes I went. He invited Caleb. Sometimes Caleb went. They sat on a boat without bringing me into the boat, and I felt both grateful and relieved and unavoidably 12. Families are wiring harnesses. Some circuits run in parallel whether or not you like the load. Some circuits run in parallel whether or not you like the load. Denise got quieter, which I didn't know she had in her. She started the kind of sentences mothers from our zip code don't usually start. "I was wrong when, and I can see now," she apologized to Lauren, in a way that did not absolve anything and did not excuse anything, and still made me proud of the woman who had once called me dramatic because I did not cry the right way when my RC car broke. In September, the court stamped the decree. My name changed places on 3 binders worth of paper. The clerk slid a stack across the counter and said, "Congratulations, because the human mouth runs scripts without checking meaning." I walked out into sunshine that had no interest in my paperwork and bought myself a sandwich too big for one man. I ate it in my truck with the windows down and listened to an old country song about a man who loses the girl and finds the part of himself that can stand being alone. Therapy kept being therapy. Max taught me to hear the hum of a room and ask if I was fixing it because it was broken or because I wanted to avoid listening to it. He taught me that trust is not the absence of evidence, it's the decision to live in a house where the smoke alarm works and you don't pull the batteries. We talked about anger like a circuit, how it surges when you bridge pain and power, how a breaker is not a failure, it's a safety. One evening, months after Thanksgiving, I found myself standing at my mother's sink washing 3 glasses because habits are ghosts you keep feeding. Denise leaned against the counter, and for once the room didn't smell like a holiday, it smelled like lemon soap and patience. "I was cruel to you," she said, and I startled because my mother doesn't usually name the beast. I was indulgent with him. She meant Caleb. I told myself it was love. It was laziness. She swallowed. I am trying to love you both and be just, not generous. I know, I said. I see it. I see it. She nodded, as if she'd been saving that oxygen for a while. Your father met with the lawyer again, she said. He's thorough. Which in her mouth is praise. He wants you to know the number, not because he thinks money fixes things, because he thinks truth does. She told me. 2 million and change, once all the accounts do their quiet arithmetic. It's the sort of number that changes where you sleep, not who you are. I don't want it because he loves me more, I said. I want him to love me right. He does, she said. Then, after a pause that felt like church, I am trying to, too. We were quiet a long time. The house hummed. The hum did not make me afraid. Somewhere outside, a car alarm chirped once, the way they do when someone locks something on purpose. This is the part where people expect a moral, a thesis, a bumper sticker. I don't have one that fits on a car. I have a life that didn't burn down because we finally paid attention to the whisper before the fire. I have a father who looked at 2 sons and decided enabling was not a sacrament. I have a mother who learned to grieve a fantasy version of her favorite and found, behind it, 2 men who could finally stop auditioning. I have a woman I married who did a terrible thing for a complicated set of reasons, and I have the person she is trying to be on the other side of that. I have a boy who calls me Jake and holds my hand with all the trust in the world when we cross a parking lot. Sometimes, on my evenings, Dylan and I drive past the skyscrapers he calls big boxes, and he points and calls out their colors, and we talk about what's inside them. People, he says. Sage, certain. I say yes. I don't tell him yet that people are the hardest circuits. A year after the Thanksgiving that rewired my family, Lauren texted me, "We're at your folks? Drop 'em there?" And when I walked in, Denise was showing Dylan how to press pecans into the top of a pie without breaking them. Frank stood at the stove stirring gravy like a man who has learned the difference between clumps and control. Caleb wasn't there. He had sent a message earlier to say he was spending the day with a friend, which could mean a therapist or a couch or a bottle. It wasn't my job to decode. Frank's face when he read the text was complicated and calm. That's the thing about men who learn late, they bring their patience like a tool. Denise glanced up at me and then back at Dylan's small hands in the bowl. We don't have to take a picture, she said, and I heard the echo of the woman who once curated our lives into albums. She looked at me fully. Or we can, if you want. Let's just be here, I said. We were. We ate pie at 4 because Dylan has his priorities straight. We watched a little football. We did not talk about blood types or wills and proper nouns. When I stood to go, Lauren put Dylan's jacket on and knelt to zip it, her hands steady. She looked up at me. There was a question in her eyes that had nothing to do with us and everything to do with the boy between us. You're picking him up at 3 tomorrow? She asked. Yep, I said. We'll go see trucks. She smiled, small, real. Have fun. At the door, Frank hugged me and did that thing where he claps your back like he's knocking on wood. Denise brushed my sleeve like she was dusting off a memory and then stopped herself, and then, new habit taking, asked, May I? I laughed and said yes, and she straightened my collar like someone who has learned consent is a verb. On the drive home, Dylan fell asleep, head tipped in the way kids' necks somehow tolerate. The city slid past, neon and taillights and a sky that glowed in a way no sky should. I caught my face in the rear view. I looked older, sure. I looked like a man whose life had caught fire and left the frame standing. When we got home, I carried him in and he didn't stir. I laid him in the small bed I'd assembled late one night while a podcast about old country songs filled the silence, and Max's homework about what kind of man do you want to be when no one's watching sat on the counter. I pulled the blanket up. He sighed, a little sound like a breaker settling. I turned off the light. The house hummed. The hum sounded like something I could build a life around. If you're waiting for me to tell you whether I forgave Lauren, whether I took Caleb's calls, whether Denise ever relapsed into worship, whether Frank stayed retired, whether the will felt like justice or punishment, I can tell you this, there aren't switches for those. There are dials. Most days, I keep them in the right range. That's what healing looks like from the inside, not a light flipped on. A current you monitor, a hand on the panel, a man who learned to trust the whisper. If this story pulled you into that dining room and made you taste the gravy and the grief and the relief, then you already know the rest. The gift wasn't the kit. It was the decision to stop pretending the house wasn't hot. It was the moment a man who has always fixed things stood up and chose to fix himself. What would you have done at that table? Would you have exposed the truth in front of everyone or taken it behind a closed door? I want to hear your take. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you draw the line between truth and spectacle and whether you think the will was justice or vengeance. If the story kept you listening, hit like so more people find it. Subscribe for more and share it with a friend who might need to hear it tonight.